Hey, welcome to my shop. It's also a garden shed and a garage, and often it feels like 10 pounds of junk in a 5-pound bag. But it works. Well, when I can find my tape measure, that is. But I'll get it sorted out one of these days. Oh, don't tell my wife, but I bought a Sawstop. It's a 3-horsepower professional cabinet saw, and for the next 28 minutes, I'd like to take you along on its assembly, setup. We'll install a 230 volt receptacle, and I'll give some first impressions toward the end. Let's get into it. Alright folks, the Sawstop is here, in all its over-engineered back-breaking glory. And lucky for me, I've got backup today. This strapping young man is my son, Andy. Strong back, but questionable judgment for agreeing to help me lift a 335-pound saw out of a truck bed. But teamwork makes the dream work, buddy. Being the astute helper that he is, Andy had a great question.
I have to ask. How much was all this?
I'm not going to tell you because you're going to tell your mom.
If your mom knew how much this saw cost, she'd be
shitting bricks.
You shouldn't use that word.
Sorry. Shitting rocks.
That means more than $2,000.
I'm not going to tell you because you're going to tell your mom.
Oh, it is. Yeah, it is.
So once everything was unloaded down to the main saw assembly, I had a pretty good question of my own.
How are we going to get this big bastard out of here?
Let me tell you, it was a heroic display of might. But I forgot to hit record.
We did it! Holy crap, this thing's heavy.
Yeah.
I got a mobile base for it, so
Okay.
hopefully this is the last time we got to deal with this.
Right.
It sucks I didn't get the video of us lifting that out of there like super strong He-Man.
Guess we gotta put it back up.
Next, we're going to install a new 230 volt receptacle for this beast. Now before we start, let me say this clearly. If you're not comfortable with electrical work, hire a pro. Or at least call your dad. The Sawstop 3-horsepower PCS has a 13 amp motor and, as shown in these pictures, has a 15 amp cord cap denoted by the 2 horizontal stabs by the ground prong. I'll be installing a 20 amp bullseye receptacle to deliver power to the PCS. A 20 amp receptacle typically has one stab shaped like a sideways T. This is because it accepts 15 and 20 amp cord caps. As shown before, the 15 amp cord cap has 2 horizontal stabs, but the 20 amp cord cap has 1 vertical and 1 horizontal stab. Also, notice I'm using a 250 volt bullseye receptacle for our 230 volt load. They make a 125 volt variant of this receptacle, but at 125 volts it is not rated for the 230 volt equipment. For my particular installation, I'll be using a Siemens 20 amp 2-pole breaker. There should be a sticker in your panel that will tell you what breakers it accepts. If the tag is missing, you will have to most likely remove a breaker to read the type molded into it and just find a 20 amp 2-pole breaker of that same type. To house the receptacle, I'll be using an old work cut-in box. I like the Legrand boxes because they have metal tabs instead of plastic, and they have a good amount of room inside the box. Finally, since I have a small shop, I also need to make a cord to extend to the saw. The PCS will be on a mobile base so I can wheel it out to the parking side of the garage when in use. I'm using a 25-foot 10-gauge cord instead of 12-gauge, which is overkill, but that's a tradesperson's way, right? I got a 20 amp right angle bale cord cap because I'm going to install the receptacle high, and this will allow the cord to drape down the wall without unplugging under its own weight. And I have a straight female cord cap to plug the saw into. Just like the receptacle, there are 250 volt and 125 volt variants, so make sure you buy the 250 volt stuff when dealing with 230 volt equipment. The 10 gauge extension cord cable is 10-3 SO cable rated at 600 volts and 90 degrees Celsius, which is plenty of voltage and ampacity for our purposes. We're running 12 gauge Romex from the panel to the receptacle, 2 hots in the ground, no neutral because this is a straight 230 volt load. Technically this should be red and black Romex, but I had a short piece of white and black and I plan on IDing the white wire with red phase tape later. But if I'm being honest, I'll probably sell this house someday without that white properly phased. Now there are some everyday home DIY YouTubers that give out electrical advice. Some advice is good, some bad. My day job for the last 23 years has been as a commercial industrial electrician, and more specifically as a direct digital controls electrician for the last 14 years. I just pretend to be a woodworker on the weekends. But seriously, be careful where you get your electrical advice. Here I'm removing the panel cover. Before you get into your panel, you should kill your main breaker. I know it's unsafe, but I'm not because I want my lights on. So get off my ass, Mom. And remember, even if your main breaker is off, the line side wires and lugs from the utility will still be hot, so be careful. Now I'm laying out where I'll cut in the receptacle. This camera shot is why you shouldn't use your Apple Watch to monitor your video. Bumping the crown, as it turns out, changes the zoom. But just place the face of the box on the wall where you want it, level it up, trace it out with a pencil, and then cut it out with a jab saw. Also, make sure that there are no wires in the wall before you cut. This can be easily done with a stud finder that has a deep scan feature for electrical. Then I'm going to fish the wire down the wall from the panel to the hole I just cut. You might have to pull a knockout in the bottom of the panel, which is not easy when there's drywall around it, but it can be done. Push the Romex through the slot in the back of the box, strip the wire, and terminate the wires on the receptacle screws. Since there is no neutral, it doesn't matter which side you land the hots on, just make sure the ground wire goes to the green screw. I recommend bending a hook on the wire and side wiring since we are working with solid wire. Back wiring solid tends to work loose over time, and never use receptacles with a compression fit. These have holes that you just push the wire into with no bolted connection, just a spring. And make sure to strip the wire far enough back so that you are not screwing the terminal down on the insulation. And the wire hook should turn in the same direction as the screw, so it tightens with the screw instead of against it. Once the receptacle is wired, install it into the box and install your cover plate. So next we're going to terminate the panel. Start with the ground wire, making sure it is terminated on the ground bus and not the neutral bus where all the white wires are. If your bare grounds and the white wires are on the same bus, it'll work, but you've got issues we're not going to go into here. Then make sure the breaker is off and terminate the hot wires to your breaker. Finally, reinstall your panel cover and turn on the breaker. It's good practice to stand to the side of the panel with your face turned away while flipping the breaker on. Most likely it'll be fine, but just in case. At this point, I like to hook a voltage meter up to the receptacle just to make sure that I have the voltage present that I expect. So you want to check for about 230 volts from hot to hot and 120 volts from each hot to ground. Next, we're going to build the 230 volt extension cord. First, disassemble your cord cap by loosening the screws on the plug end. Now I'm opening the body of the cord cap to accept the 10 gauge cable. Since I'm making a 10 gauge cord, not something smaller, I can remove and throw away this black cord grip insert. Next, slide your cable up through the cord grip portion of the cord cap body. Here I am loosening the screws on the plug end in prep for the conductors and the ground wire. So I trim the conductors and ground to where I only have enough wire emerging from the outer jacket to insert into the plug end of the cord cap. There's not much room inside the cord cap body to tuck the wire insulation into, so they have to be pretty short. Then strip your wires, being careful not to cut too deep into the copper strands, and twist the strands together tight so they easily insert into the cord cap screw terminals. Now insert the wire into the screw terminals, making sure that no strands from one conductor pokes over to the other conductor or the ground. That will get a little sparkly when you plug it in. Then begin tightening it down. You want the green wire under the green screw. I like to put the black wire under the gold screw and the white under the silver screw because that's what you do for 120 volt. So that seems like good practice to me. Then just line up the cord cap body pin with the plug-in notch, press together, and tighten down the plug-in screws. Finally, tighten down the cord grip, then plug it in. The male end is pretty much the same as the female end to assemble, just a bigger pain in the ass because it's at a right angle and harder to get together. And just like the receptacle, I like to test to make sure the expected voltage is present at the female end of the cord when both ends are put together. We are going to put that saw on this base. Hopefully it won't be as bad as getting it out of the truck. Okay. You ready?
Yep. Ready?
Go.
Got it.
Okay.
Sweet.
Look at that. And the instructions say you need 5 people.
Heck no.
Psh.
Not us.
Thanks, Andy.
Welcome.
I think I can scoot it around from here. I had to include this shot. It's just too satisfying. I know I'm not the only one out there that thinks that. Something about wiping the oil off of a brand new cast iron tabletop. I had to document it. It'll never look that nice again, most likely. It's beautiful. So after all this horsing around, I think we can finally start putting this saw together, starting with the elevation hand wheel. Now I found that both hand wheel keyways were a pretty tight fit and seemed to go in better with some gentle taps from a dead blow hammer. Oh, and if you're up for some fun, every time I say hex key or hand wheel, take a drink. After sliding on the hand wheel, you want to rotate it to a good position to allow access to the set screw on the back side, and then tighten the set screw with the provided hex key. I can't remember the size of the hex key, but Sawstop gives a set of hex keys that are needed for assembly and setup. There are places where extended hex keys come in handy, and I'll point those spots out as we encounter them. Next, screw in the crank handle, and then cinch it down with a number 13 open-end wrench. Now this part can be an easy spot to make a mistake. There are 2 different length hand wheel locks that thread into the center of the hand wheels. Make sure the longer of the 2 is threaded into the blade elevation hand wheel. Now for the blade tilt hand wheel. Again, I'm gently tapping the key into the keyway with a dead blow hammer. Then slip on the hand wheel. Tighten with the provided hex key. Install your crank handle with a number 13 open-end wrench. And finish by installing the shorter of the 2 wheel locks into the center of the tilt hand wheel. Now it's time to install the dust collection port. In this still image, I'm pointing out the notch in the cabinet knockout. This notch indexes the dust port collector so it only goes in one way. The port comes pre-assembled inside your cabinet saw. You just slip it through the circular knockout in the cabinet, lining up the port to the notch. Then install the 3 provided button head screws and lock washers. The dust collection port is plastic, so drive these by hand, or remember to set your clutch on your drill driver so you don't accidentally strip them. The motor cover has 2 arrows molded into it by the hinge. Line the motor cover up with the cabinet so these arrows point to the metal tubes that the hinge rod slips through. Starting at the bottom, slip the hinge rod through the first metal tube, then guide it upwards through the half cylinders molded into the plastic cover. You might have to wiggle the cover while pushing the rod to get it to line up and progress through the half cylinders. But once the rod goes all the way up into the last metal cylinder, rotate the rod so the bent end fits into the hook on the motor cover, keeping it from working its way back out over time. Okay, on to installing the cast iron wings. Some people like to build contraptions or cribbing to support the wing while they bolt it to the table, and those people have much more sense than I do. I just propped it up with my knee and started the bolts. As it turns out, I'm glad I saved that time because these wings do not like to lay flat, and that time saved was spent loosening and retightening bolts. The wing assembly was the worst part of the whole process for me by far. I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to get it perfect before realizing that perfection just wasn't in the cards. I don't want to cut too much of my struggle out so I can illustrate just how fiddly these wings are, but I am going to speed up the video to 15x so I don't bore you too much. My first idea was to snug the wing to the table so I could tap it where I wanted it with the dead blow and then tighten it up. This first wing went okay, but the second was not nearly as cooperative. So the right table wing had more of a mind of its own. Whenever I would get one side where I wanted it, it would tend to drift upward as I tightened bolts down. So by the time I got to the opposite end of the wing, it wasn't as flat as I would like. My next idea was to clamp the side down that I started with to hopefully prevent drift as I tightened the rest of the bolts down. It was better, but I still wasn't happy with it. But I decided it was good enough to move on and I'd deal with it later. Mounting the switch box is pretty straightforward. There are 2 threaded holes under the left wing that the switch box bolts to. However, this is a spot where an elongated hex key with a ball end for angled access comes in handy. With enough time and effort, this task can be done with the hex key provided by Sawstop, but it's a little short and slips off easily.
That's what she said.
The blade wrench holder installs under the wiring grommet on the motor cover side of the saw. And the accessory tool holder installs on the opposite side of the saw cabinet. It just hooks on and gets one screw to hold it in place. What's there to say about installing the blade? Unscrew the nut, put the blade in, thread the nut back on, and snug it down. Be sure not to get it He-Man tight though. On to installing the fence system. First, install the rails. There are notches for the miter slots, so if you line those up, you're sure to get the correct rail on the correct side. The front rail is also a little bit longer. It's also worth mentioning that the fence system hardware packs are for both 36 and 52-inch rail systems. I have a 36-inch fence system, so I will have a couple countersunk head bolts left over. The countersunk bolts that hold the rails to the wings have nuts on the back side instead of threading in. And now that I have the fence rails to help hold everything where I want it, I'm back to trying to get the table flatter. And again, this is at like 15 times normal speed. This part took forever. Sawstop allows a tolerance of 0.010 of an inch measured diagonally across the table. My worst gap measured anywhere after tons of fiddling was 0.006 of an inch. For the extension table, I start by mounting the adjustment bracket, followed by installing the leg supports to the fence rails. Then position the extension table in place and loosely start the extension table mounting bolts. After that, I installed the height adjustment feet onto the legs, and then installed the legs to the support brackets. I tried to get the legs as square as possible before tightening everything down, while simultaneously using the adjustment bracket and a straight edge to get the extension table fastened flat with the cast iron table. And as you can see, getting things flat continues to be the part of this whole process requiring the most patience. Here I am loosely installing the fence tube to the front rail. Again, the hardware pack is the same for a 36-inch and 52-inch fence system. So for my 36-inch fence, I will only use 7 of the 9 bolts provided. Now that the fence tube is loosely installed, it's time to set up the fence. Start by threading the handle onto the cam lock. Then pull the fence tube away from the table as far as it will go and place the fence on the fence tube on the left-hand side. Press the fence handle down to engage the cam lock on the fence tube. If the fence does not completely tighten on the tube, you will need to adjust the parallelism screws until the fence is securely clamped to the tube. Now push the fence tube back toward the table and measure a 1/32 gap between the left fence slider pad and the rail. If you don't have feeler gauges handy, this is about the width of a credit card. Once you have a proper gap, snug the leftmost fence tube bolt, then unlock the fence and slide it to the right side of the tube. Repeat the gapping process using the right-hand fence slider pad. After the right gap is set, check to make sure your fence slides smoothly from one side to the other without any binding or excessive play. Once you're happy with the fence action, tighten the remaining tube bolts. To adjust the fence face perpendicular to the tabletop, use a square and adjust the leveling screws on the top side of the fence. Next, check that the fence is parallel to the miter slot. I used a 3/4 inch setup block in the miter slot, which was raised out of the slot just enough that I could see if there was a gap or binding between the miter slot and the fence face. If adjustment is necessary, use the parallelism screws above the fence slider pads. To set the rule on your fence, just loosen and move the lens. I'm using the rule on my square for initial setup, but I will use a piece of scrap wood for further calibration after the saw is completely set up. I did check that the blade was square to the miter slot using a dial indicator, but forgot to film it. It was within a couple thousandths right out of the box. Sawstop recommends you check the blade to break gap before first use and for every different blade used. Different 10-inch blades can have slightly different dimensions. The gap between the break and the closest point of the blade should be between 1/16 and 1/8 of an inch. Use the provided gauge and hex key to check the gap and make adjustments. This is done easiest through the side cover under the extension table. Finally, now for the part we've all been waiting for. And there you have it. Your Sawstop PCS is fully assembled, calibrated, and ready to make beautiful, accurate cuts. Or just sit there looking awesome in your shop. Either way, it's a win. So my first impressions are that this saw is set up really well right out of the box, needing only a few minor adjustments. The assembly manuals, while easy to follow, accurate, and having full color illustrations, have somewhat scattered information between the saw owner's manual, the T-Glide owner's manual, and the fence system quick start sheet. I really like the hardware blister packs and how descriptive they are with pointing out what all the hardware is for. The very minor exception to this is that the manuals and the hardware packs do not make it clear that they're for both 36-inch and 52-inch rail systems. So don't freak out if you have a 36-inch system and have some extra hardware. There's also the fiddling around trying to get the table flat. Now, Sawstop allows 10,000ths of an inch table variants measured diagonally. I was able to get mine within 6,000ths of an inch, but this did not come without a lot of trial and error. My tips for getting this within tolerance much quicker than I did would be to not get worked up over the table flatness until the fence rails are installed, then use the rails to help keep everything flat. And also to just be patient. Once the saw is assembled, it is operationally amazing. As I record this, I've been using the saw for 6 months now and have built a few projects on it. After periodically checking the saw to see if it's remained square, I'm happy to report that it is as accurate as the day I first turned it on after setup. Now, after coming from a popular job site table saw that I had to recalibrate constantly, this is a breath of fresh air. I'm spending more time building than fiddling with my tools and worrying if the cut that I just made is as square as the one before it. I can honestly say that this is the last table saw that I will ever need. Now, speaking of those other projects, I have a lot of upcoming plans for content. I'm sure you've noticed the shop looks a little different now, so stay tuned for how that turns out. I hope you've all enjoyed this video and that you like, subscribe, and all that other stuff if you're interested in my future videos. Also, please comment below. As my first attempt at YouTube creation, I'd like to know what you all enjoyed about this video, or didn't. It'll help guide the production of future projects. I've learned so much through the process of creating this video and just scratched the surface of content creation. Thank you all for watching.